Joining me now is former Canisius University President John Hurley to share some perspective. John, we've been seeing a lot of protests happen at colleges all across the country, and some might be thinking, why haven't we seen them in Western New York to the extent that we have at a Columbia or USC? What are your feelings on that?
Well, we certainly have enough colleges and universities here in the area, as you know, but my sense of the student body in Western New York is it's a hardworking student body that is holding down a job, trying to pay tuition and rent, trying to get through the semester. And this is occurring at a kind of a critical time in the semester. So I think this thing has just mushroomed very quickly, and maybe has caught some of our students unaware here in Western New York. Not that I'm encouraging it, but because I do sense, I'm still on the Canisius campus from time to time, and I sense there is a deep concern over the humanitarian crisis that's unfolding there in the Middle East. So it's not for lack of caring, but it's probably there are a lot of other things going on in life.
Got it. There has been some criticism of university presidents not reacting as quickly or as decisively when the protests began. Do you think that criticism is fair?
Well, I think there may be two ways of looking at that. One is to the extent that they hesitated because they were unsure as to what the boundaries were on speech and the like. I think that is a fault in their policies and in their approach. So I could find fault with that. To the extent that it represents maybe a degree of caution by a university president about not wanting to escalate a situation or create a circumstance in which there could be serious injury or even death, you know, prudence probably dictates that you take it slow in these matters and that you don't, you know, I've heard from a lot of people saying, well, why don't they just rush in with riot gear and disband that? That escalates a situation maybe unnecessarily. So in those kinds of situations, I think some caution and some dialogue is important.
Sure. Let's talk about policies, though, because we've heard the protesters talk a lot about their free speech rights, and you're also an attorney. So when it comes to legal rights and responsibilities that the colleges might have to limit free speech, what would those fall under?
Yep. And one thing we should distinguish is between a public university like the University of Buffalo and a private school. The public university is bound by the requirements of the First Amendment and all of the law that's developed under the First Amendment. First Amendments don't apply in private situations, but that's not really a huge distinction because most campuses have policies in place that address academic freedom and the rights of assembly and the like. But on the issue of free speech, I think what's happened here is universities have gone perhaps too far in maybe taking sides as to what speech is going to be protected. They have been insufficiently protective of the right of free speech generally. And free speech entails the right of people to say things, even things that are hateful and offensive and that people might find troubling. Over the last several years, I found that we were developing a situation where if people were offended, they wanted the other person's right to speak curtailed. And oftentimes, and I think this is what happened with the testimony of the presidents from Harvard and Yale back in the fall, they're picking sides as to what speech they're going to protect and what they're not. So I am a proponent of protecting all forms of speech, understanding that that is going to be messy and chaotic at times, and it could be offensive. But you know, I came of age as a lawyer when the Nazis wanted to march in Skokie, Illinois, which was a largely Jewish suburb of Illinois. And you looked and you said, if there was going to be a limit on free speech, this was it. And the courts allowed the Nazis to march, and we got through that. And we get through lots of things like that in the free speech area. So I think people have to take a step back and say, free speech is an important right, and we're not going to be offended by it, and we're going to live through it.
And it gets very complicated, though, when you're talking about students feeling threatened. Jewish students specifically at Columbia who have felt unsafe on their campus. That's a whole other area that a campus community has to confront.
That's the area where presidents are having difficulty drawing the exact line. So free speech doesn't include the right to harass, intimidate, assault, and to discriminate on the basis of gender or religion or national origin. So some of the hateful speech about Jews that are coming out of these protests get very dangerously close and sometimes cross the line. And I think that's what the Jewish students are looking for, some protection. But on the other hand, there are lots of reports coming out of campuses about these protests that say the people were expressing opinions, but it wasn't violent and it wasn't intimidating. And so people ought to be able to deal with that.
Right, in some cases. They're happening all over, and certainly what has happened at Columbia isn't necessarily what's gone down at all institutions. As a former administrator, it must be terribly disappointing for you to see that in some cases graduation ceremonies are being canceled because of some of these protests that are ongoing.
Well, yes, and I'd say not just me, but students and their parents who were paying tuition and were looking forward to this momentous event in life now find it canceled because students, purportedly in their exercise of their right of free speech, are disrupting the normal flow of the academic institution. So that's where a prompt response by the institution and placing boundaries on what is permitted and what isn't is very important, because to have to cancel, to send the students in Columbia to online education, I would be outraged if I was a student down there minding my own business and now suddenly deprived of my classroom experience. So that is where the protesters have crossed the line and are getting, doing things that are infringing on the rights of other students.
Right, and that's always the debate is, where do your rights, end and the infringement on others begin. And this debate unquestionably happening at colleges and universities all across the country and really all around the world. And we appreciate your time, John Hurley, former president of Canisius University. Thanks for joining us.
Great.